Imagine boarding a ship so enormous, so luxurious, and so advanced that the entire world believed it could never sink. Now imagine standing on its deck just hours later, realizing that every single person around you might be living their final moments. This is the true story of the Titanic. When the Titanic left England on her very first voyage, over 2,000 people believed they were stepping onto the safest ship ever built. None of them knew history was already counting down their final days. The Titanic wasn't just another passenger ship. It was the largest moving object ever built by human hands, stretching nearly 269 meters long and weighing over 46,000 tons. It was a symbol of human ambition and confidence. People didn't simply buy a ticket, they bought a place in history. Inside, the Titanic looked more like a floating palace than a ship. Grand staircases, crystal chandeliers, luxurious dining rooms, elegant lounges, and even a heated swimming pool. Nothing like it had ever existed before. The ship carried some of the richest people on Earth, millionaires, business leaders, famous personalities. But it also carried hundreds of ordinary families searching for a better future in America. For every passenger, this journey meant something different. Commanding this magnificent vessel was Captain Edward Smith, a man with nearly 40 years of sailing experience. This was supposed to be his final voyage before retirement. No one could have imagined how history would remember his name forever. The Titanic represented the greatest achievement of modern engineering. Newspapers praised it, engineers admired it, and millions believed one thing: this ship was practically unsinkable. That single belief would become one of history's greatest mistakes. On April 10th, 1912, thousands gathered along the docks to witness history. Families waved goodbye, children smiled with excitement, and the Titanic slowly began moving toward the open sea. No one standing on that shoreline knew they were watching the beginning of a tragedy. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. Passengers enjoyed elegant dinners, live music, relaxing walks on the deck, and breathtaking views of the Atlantic Ocean. It felt less like a voyage and more like a dream. But far ahead, hidden beneath the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, a massive iceberg had already begun drifting into the Titanic's path. The passengers laughed, the orchestra played, and no one aboard had the slightest idea that disaster was already waiting in the darkness. As the Titanic continued westward, wireless operators began receiving a series of ice warnings from nearby ships. Large ice fields, floating ice, and dangerous icebergs had all been reported directly along the Titanic's route. The danger was real, and it was getting closer with every passing hour. Throughout the day, more warning messages arrived from different ships sailing ahead. Each report described the same terrifying sight: enormous icebergs floating directly in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. But aboard the Titanic, life continued as if nothing had changed. That Sunday evening was unusually calm. The Atlantic Ocean looked like polished glass. There were no waves crashing against the icebergs, no moonlight reflecting across the sea, making the ice almost impossible to see until it was too late. High above the deck, two lookouts stood inside the crow's nest. Their job was simple: scan the darkness and spot danger before anyone else could. Hour after hour, they searched the endless black horizon. Then, at exactly 11:40 p.m., one of the lookouts suddenly froze. A dark shape appeared directly ahead. His heart began racing. He grabbed the warning bell, rang it 3 times, and shouted the words that would change history forever: "Iceberg! Right ahead!" Within seconds, the warning reached the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch looked ahead and instantly realized the terrifying truth. A massive iceberg was directly in the Titanic's path, and there was almost no time left to react. Every decision made over the next few seconds would determine the fate of more than 2,000 lives. "Hard a starboard!" Murdoch shouted the command. The helmsman immediately spun the massive steering wheel with all his strength. At the same time, another desperate order followed: "Full astern!" The engines began reversing, but physics was already working against them. The Titanic slowly began turning, but there was one problem: the ship was simply too enormous. Nearly 50,000 tons of steel couldn't change direction instantly. The iceberg continued growing larger, every single second. Then, it happened. The starboard side of the Titanic scraped against the iceberg. From above, it looked almost harmless. There was no giant explosion, no dramatic crash. Many passengers barely felt anything at all. But beneath the freezing water, the iceberg had ripped open several sections of the ship's hull. Thousands of tons of icy seawater immediately began flooding into the lower compartments. At that exact moment, the Titanic was already doomed. The only thing left was time. Deep below the decks, the engineering crew watched in horror as freezing seawater poured through the damaged hull. Compartment after compartment began filling faster than anyone had expected. The pumps were switched on immediately, but they stood absolutely no chance against the Atlantic Ocean. Thomas Andrews, the man who had designed the Titanic, rushed below deck to inspect the damage himself. He walked silently through the flooded compartments, carefully measuring the rising water. With every step, his expression became more serious. After only a few minutes, Andrews reached a devastating conclusion. The iceberg had damaged too many watertight compartments. The Titanic had been designed to survive flooding in 4 compartments, but 6 were already taking on water. The mathematics was undeniable. Thomas Andrews returned to the bridge. The officers waited silently, hoping for good news. Instead, Andrews calmly delivered a sentence that froze everyone in place. The ship will sink. She has less than 3 hours. For a few moments, nobody spoke. The world's greatest ship, the ship people believed was unsinkable, was about to disappear beneath the Atlantic Ocean, and more than 2,000 people were still on board. Captain Edward Smith wasted no time. He gave the order every officer had hoped they would never hear: prepare the lifeboats. Crew members rushed across the decks, removing protective covers and checking ropes. The evacuation of the largest ship in the world had officially. At the same time, the wireless operators began sending desperate distress calls into the darkness. Using Morse code, they transmitted one message over and over again: CQD, CQD. Moments later, they also used the brand new international distress signal, SOS. Most passengers were still completely unaware of what had happened. Some continued playing cards, others relaxed in the lounges. Many had already gone to bed. To them, it felt like an ordinary night at sea. Then crew members began knocking on cabin doors. Passengers were politely asked to put on warm clothes, wear their life jackets, and report to the boat deck immediately. Most people still believed it was simply a precaution. Almost no one realized the ship was actually sinking. As the first lifeboats were lowered, something unbelievable happened. Many passengers refused to leave the ship. The Titanic still looked perfectly safe. It was warm, brightly lit, and far more comfortable than a tiny wooden boat floating in the freezing Atlantic. As a result, the very first lifeboats left the ship only half full. Seats that could have saved lives remained empty forever. As more lifeboats disappeared into the darkness, the front of the Titanic slowly began sinking lower into the icy Atlantic. At first, the movement was almost impossible to notice, but the crew could see the truth. Every passing minute, more seawater poured into the ship. The tilt became more obvious. Passengers who had ignored the warnings finally noticed something was terribly wrong. Loose chairs, luggage, and small objects slowly began sliding across the deck. Panic quickly replaced confidence. The band continued playing. No one knows exactly which song was played last, but witness accounts agree on one thing: the musicians stayed at their positions, trying to calm frightened passengers, even though they knew they might never leave the ship alive. Soon, there were no lifeboats left. More than 1,500 people remained trapped aboard the Titanic. Some prayed quietly, others searched desperately for their loved ones. Many simply stood in silence, staring into the freezing darkness. Then, the lights began to flicker, one by one. The bright windows of the Titanic faded into darkness. The powerful engines finally fell silent. For the first time since leaving England, the world's greatest ship was completely powerless. At approximately 2:18 a.m., the unimaginable happened. After enduring unimaginable stress for nearly 3 hours, the Titanic's enormous steel hull could no longer hold together. With a deafening roar, the ship snapped into two massive pieces. Moments later, the bow disappeared beneath the Atlantic forever. The stern rose high into the freezing night sky before making its final descent, carrying hundreds of people with it. Within minutes, the freezing Atlantic was filled with more than 1,500 people struggling to survive. The water temperature was around -2 degrees Celsius. For most people, survival lasted only a matter of minutes before hypothermia took over. Hours later, the RMS Carpathia finally arrived. It rescued every survivor it could find. But by then, it was already too late for most. Out of more than 2,200 people aboard, only around 700 survived. More than a century has passed. Yet the story of the Titanic continues to fascinate millions of people around the world. It reminds us that even the greatest achievements of human engineering are never greater than the power of nature. The Titanic wasn't remembered because it was the largest ship ever built. It was remembered because it changed maritime safety forever, and because thousands of ordinary people showed extraordinary courage on one unforgettable night. If you enjoyed this story and want to discover more incredible moments from history, subscribe for more documentaries every day.